Hey guys, Dr. Michael Young here. Hope everything's going well in your world. Uh, what's going on with our class? This is the week that you need to get your video recording project uploaded to our course page for your classmates' viewing pleasure. I'll have a bit more to say about that later. Right now, we're pushing ahead. We're pushing ahead into Chapter 14. Chapter 14, Lesson 13, is on organizational culture. So sit back, take notes, enjoy the lesson. Let me know if you have any questions. All right. Down here. So, right, organizational culture. Organizational culture is one of those almost mythical creatures that it's out there. We know it exists, and we know it's super duper important. There have been lots of books written about organizational culture. Organizational culture has been studied. Personally, I've worked for different organizations, many different organizations over my career. Private organizations, state government, of course, several different universities. Been involved with lots of organizations, and I can tell you that organizational culture is really important. Organizational culture. We've got a definition here. It's a set of shared, taken for granted, implicit assumptions that hold groups and determines how it perceives, thinks about, and reacts to its environment, its various environments. It's got 4 different characteristics of the culture. It's a shared concept. It's learned over time. It influences our behavior at work, and it impacts outcomes at multiple levels. That is, at the individual level, at the group level, at the company level, at the corporate level, right? So we have figure 14.2 from your textbook. This is written by one of your authors. This is Organizational Culture and Climate in a Handbook of Psychology. Okay? And a lot of an organization's culture oftentimes is determined by the founder's values. Think about some organizations that are out there today. For example, they still talk about Colonel Sanders. I guess Colonel Sanders has sort of become a figurehead of Kentucky Fried Chicken, but I truly believe that Colonel Sanders, in the way that he started Kentucky Fried Chicken, has an influence that's still felt in the organization today. Think about Apple, right? Apple was founded by a couple of Steves, Jobs and Wozniak. And these guys, Wozniak is still around, of course. Jobs is passed on, but his influence is very much felt, very innovative, very iconoclastic. He was thought outside the box. So there have been books that have been written about companies' founders and how those founders have influenced organizations. For example, there's one called Built to Last. This is a book that's been on the top seller list of business books for a long, long time. And what they did is they compared companies that have lasted and become big leaders in their markets and industries versus other companies that just kind of fell by the wayside. And they attribute a lot of that to the organizational culture. So the drivers of culture, of course, the founder's values, the industry and the business environment, the national culture, the organization's vision and strategy, and the behavior of its leaders. This influences the culture, which influences the structure and internal processes. This, in turn, influences group and social processes. It influences work attitudes and behaviors, and this influences outcomes. And again, I can tell you, this is not just some made-up bullcrap. This is actual stuff. Having worked for many different organizations throughout my career, I've seen this personally. I've seen how organizational culture can really influence your life as an employee and can also influence the satisfaction and outcomes you'll have with a particular organization. There are three different levels of organizational culture. One is, this is an anthropological term, artifacts. This is what we can actually see and touch, or we can observe, the physical manifestations, the way that people behave and so forth. This is the first level. The second level, you've got the espoused values enacting, espoused versus the enacted values. This is what people say, and this is what people actually do. And then at the third level, you have the basic underlying assumptions. This is sometimes been referred to as an iceberg, and these basic underlying assumptions is a much larger portion of organizational culture that we don't see, that's hidden underneath the surface. Organizational culture has 4 different functions. It helps to establish organizational identity. It sets our organization apart from the rest of the industry. It encourages collective commitment. If the members, sometimes called stakeholders of an organization, identify with the organizational culture, they're more likely to be committed. It ensures social stability. It gives you a roadmap. It might be explicitly stated, or it might be implicit. It might be part of the assumptions. But this roadmap helps to tell you what to do in cases where you're not sure. Which ties nicely into this one, acts as a sense-making device. Hey, what do I do? What does this mean? Well, let's look at the organizational culture. This is how we treat those types of things at West Virginia State University. It happens to be the organization with which I'm affiliated at the moment. There are 4 different types of organizational culture. One type we're going to call clan, and this focuses more on collaboration. This has an internal focus. It values flexibility rather than stability. It focuses on achieving effectiveness by encouraging collaboration, trust, and support, and it's employee focused. Second one we're going to call hierarchy, or it focuses on control. Or another name for this type of culture. This is collaborate culture. This is also sometimes called control culture. So this hierarchy also has an internal focus. It's formalized, more structured work environment. Stability and control are valued over flexibility in this type of culture. And it's efficient, timely, and reliable. This one is called adhocracy, and sometimes called a create culture. It's externally focused rather than internally focused like these two. And flexibility is valued. Creation of new products and services is its function or its main purpose. And the culture is adaptable, creative, and fast to respond to the marketplace, which brings us to the last one. This is the market culture, which is competitive. It's a strong external focus, and stability and control are valued. Members within this particular type of culture focus on competition. There's a strong desire to deliver results and accomplish goals. We all live in a yellow submarine. This figure from your textbook shows these in a graph. Here we've got the different things, the different dimensions here. We've got flexibility and discretion as opposed to stability and control. We've got internal focus and integration as opposed to external focus and differentiation. And so here you have those 4 types of culture, bing, 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 here. And it talks about their means and ends. For example, the adhocracy, the create culture, focuses again, remember, on flexibility and discretion. Its external focus and differentiation. Its means is adaptability, creativity, and agility. Its ends is innovation, growth, cutting-edge output. Jumping down here, still external focus, but focus on stability and control, we've got the market or compete culture. What's the means by which it functions? It focuses on customers, productivity, enhancing competitiveness. The ends that it produces are market share, profitability, and goal achievement. Over here, now see we're moving internal, still focusing on stability and control. We've got hierarchy culture, and the means that hierarchy culture uses are capable processes, consistency, process control, and measurement. The ends that it produces are efficiency, timeliness, smooth functioning. As we move up here, remember we're still internal on our graph, but now we're focusing on flexibility and discretion. We call this the clan or collaborative culture. The means in which it operates is cohesion, participation, communication, and empowerment. The ends that it produces are morale, people, development, and commitment. So, what are the outcomes of those organizational cultures? Well, studies show that employees are more satisfied and committed to organizations with clan-type cultures. Studies show that innovation and quality can be increased by building characteristics associated with clan, adhocracy, and market cultures. Studies also show financial performance is not strongly related to organizational culture. However, market cultures tend to have more positive organizational outcomes. Red, in other words, financial performance. Now, we not only have our main cultures, but we also have subcultures. Subcultures means that we don't have just a single homogeneous culture. Rather, we have these multiple subcultures that either intensify the existing cultural understanding and practices or diverge from them. These subcultures might form around functional or occupational groups or work roles. For example, accounting might have its own wild and crazy culture. Marketing department might have its own creative culture. You might have cultures that form around divisions and departments. These might be product markets or maybe geographic areas, technologies, markets, and productions, or levels of management. 4 truths about cultural change. Culture is so important that there have been lots of studies that have been devoted on how can we manage culture, how can we change our culture, how can we improve our culture, how can we make sure that our culture is one in which our employees are actually working towards our organization's goals rather than indifferent to or actually working against our organization's goals. So leaders are the architects and developers of organizational change. You might have heard the leaders have to, walk the talk, right? They have to actually do what they say. Changing culture starts with one of the 3 levels of organizational cultures that we talked about earlier: artifacts, the espoused values, or the basic underlying assumptions. You also need to consider how closely the current culture change aligns with the organization's vision and strategic plans. This is a proactive process, so you're trying to guide it into a particular direction. You want to make sure you're moving in the right direction rather than the wrong direction. And you want to use a structured approach when trying to implement cultural change. What are the mechanisms for managing culture? Well, you can have these formal mechanisms, these formal statements. You can talk about the organization philosophy. You can talk about the mission. You can talk about the vision. You can talk about the values. You can play around with the materials used for recruiting. These represent the visible artifacts. This past week, We had a visit from Toyota Motor Manufacturing in West Virginia. And some of you guys were actually there. And you'll get extra credit for that in the final exam. But one of the things that I noticed was they spent a lot of time talking about their mission, their vision, their values, and the organizational philosophy of Toyota. You can, the physical space influences organizational culture. Spacing among people and buildings, location of office furniture, open spaces, flex space. We know that organizations like Google and Apple try to have what they call campuses where people are free to come and go. It'll be interesting to see how people working at home influences organizational culture. My own feeling is, and this kind of makes common sense, at least to me, is that it's going to be more difficult to manage organizational culture when people are working from home because they don't have a shared physical space. This means they're going to have less chance to actually intermingle. They'll be less associated with a particular physical location. All this is going to make it harder. This working at home revolution that we're seeing right now is going to make it harder for organizations to manage their organization culture. Moving right ahead, some other mechanisms for creating cultural change: slogans, language, sayings, explicit rewards, status symbols. You might have heard the old, it's kind of a cliche, who gets the corner office? The corner office has 2 windows, and so it's a status symbol. These little things can mean a lot. Stories, legends, or myths. At West Virginia State University, we've got the statue of Katherine Johnson, which is right outside the coal complex. This is part of our long legacy of producing leaders, great leaders that maybe their role was not adequately recognized, but now is being recognized. And so, we've got a long history and culture at West Virginia State University. Universities have organizational cultures just as much, or maybe even more so, than private organizations. And then also role modeling, training, and coaching. All of these are mechanisms for creating and managing organizational culture and for creating culture change. For different organizational activities and processes, leaders can pay attention to those activities. They can measure control. They can send messages to employees about acceptable norms. Leader reactions to critical incidents. People learn and pay attention to emotions exhibited by leaders. Positive emotions spread. Negative emotions travel faster and farther.
In the town where I was born.
Also, organizational systems, procedures, and organizational goals. All of these things influence cultures. These things are reflected in how organizations manage communication, recruitment, selection, development, promotion, layoffs, and retirements. You might be asking yourself, well, how is culture learned? Well, there's this process called socialization, which, as you might have guessed, it's related to the sociology literature. Socialization is a process by which a person learns the values, norms, and required behaviors which permit them to participate as a member of an organization. There are 3 phases in the model of organization socialization. It's anticipatory, the encounter, the change, and acquisition. So let's go through each one of these one by one in more detail. Starting with the first one, the anticipatory organization. Well, right now, a lot of you guys are actually starting to think about your job. Many of you are working, I know that, but many of you are thinking, well, after I graduate, after I get my degree from West Virginia State University, I'm going to move into a different job. And so you're anticipating, well, what do you think the organization is, the culture is like at this organization? What about that organization? So you might be going on the internet, looking at stuff. I'm sure some of you went to the career fair that we had last week. You're going by our placement office and talking to people, maybe looking again on the internet, social media. Maybe you're talking to some current employees. A more formal process by which anticipatory socialization occurs is through what's called a realistic job preview. Realistic job previews is where they don't sugarcoat, tell you, hey man, this is a job. We expect you to work. There's some things that are going to be difficult. This mitigates unrealistic expectations formed during this phase, and research shows that it has higher performance and lower quit rates. Second phase of this socialization process is the encounter. Employees come to learn what the organization is really like. Organizations use formal onboarding programs oftentimes during this second phase. In phase 3, you've got change in acquisitions. Employees master important tasks and roles and adjust to their group's values and norms. What the research tells us about organizational socialization. What does it tell us? It tells us that onboarding programs result in increased retention, productivity, and rates of task completion. It shows us that many organizations use socialization tactics to reinforce a culture that promotes ethical behavior. It shows that managers need to help new hires integrate with the culture to overcome stress associated with a new environment. It shows us that support for the stage model is mixed. Different techniques are appropriate for different people at different times. In other words, there's no one single way to socialize employees. It shows, research also tells us that managers should pay attention to the socialization of diverse employees. Finally, we're going to talk about mentoring. Mentoring is something that's received an increasing amount of research since I have been a management professor and a researcher of organizations. Mentoring is where it can be formal, it can be informal. It's a process of forming and maintaining intensive and lasting developmental relationships between a variety of developers and a junior person. And a lot of times this process might be more formal. I think a lot of organizations are making it more formal now than what they used to be. And it's where, an older, typically older, not necessarily older, but at least a more experienced employee takes a less experienced employee under their wing, so to speak, and helps them to learn the ropes of the organization. And this mentoring process occurs over 4 phases. You've got the initiation phase, you've got the cultivation phase, you've got the separation phase, and then you've got the redefinition of the relationship phase. All right, that's it. That's it for this week. This helps me to bring this thing back into focus sometimes. Anyway, hey, stay awesome, guys. This is Michael saying I'll see you next week. Talk to you later.